Coming up on the podcast.
The research strongly suggests that there's a mitochondrial dysfunction in a lot of diagnoses.
I'm interviewing Taryn Fletcher.
How do vitamins and minerals improve your stress response? That's a big question. Well, as far as an exact mechanism goes, what we think is happening is that the nutrients are upregulating function.
A scientist at Hardy Nutritionals, the world's most researched mental health supplement.
With the moms, they found that depression scores improved. And then they also found a couple of other things, that if they had previously trialed psychiatric medications, they did better. They responded better to the nutrient.
We're talking not just about the research behind it, but also the stories.
Thought it was toxic. Those delusions just kept being a part of his experience. Over time, they were able to get him to take it regularly. And then finally, it began to stabilize him again. And he's been taking it ever since. And now he runs the order department here at Hardy Nutritionals. And again, you'd never know that he had that diagnosis.
Including my own. I tried the formula for honestly just 30 days. And within those 30 days, my emotional regulation was completely changed. Hey there, and welcome to the Nutritional Mental Health Podcast, the podcast where we talk about the intersection of nutrition and psychological sciences. My name's Annika, and I'm an ADHD nutrition research expert. To learn more about this research, join my Patreon where you get a free ebook every single month, as well as group coaching and early access to this content. For other options, join my newsletter, subscribe to my YouTube channel, or join the Discord server where we actually get to communicate with each other, and I think that's pretty fun. All of that is in the description below. Now I know this is what you're more excited about, so let's get into the episode. Let's just start here. What even is the daily essential nutrients that we're talking about with the research in a little bit? What is it? How is it formulated? Why was it formulated that way? How do you make it more bioavailable? All of those questions.
All of those things. So our origin story, if we want to go back to that beginning point, our story began with the suicide of a mother who had bipolar disorder. That was Debbie Steffen, was her name. She turns out that her father had bipolar and had committed suicide prior to that, earlier than that. So this takes us back to the mid 1990s. Tony Steffen and Debbie Steffen had kids, and two of those kids had really severe bipolar disorder as well. And Tony was really worried that they were going to follow that same path. He happened to meet up with David Hardy. I guess you could call it a coincidence. I don't really believe in coincidences that way, but they met together. At that time, David was in animal feed formulation, and they met together on a volunteer basis doing other things. And Tony started talking about this, and David was like, bipolar disorder, I'm not really familiar with that. But in the animal kingdom, in the animal world, I formulate for cattle and for hogs and things like that. And he goes, in the animal world, the pigs have this disorder called porcine vice, or ear and tail biting syndrome. And one of the things that we do to settle that behavior down is to increase the mineral content of their food, and that helps settle them down. So I wonder if that's an equivalent thing. And so they together they developed a human version of what basically it's just vitamins and minerals. Like all animal life needs them, right? And they gave that to Tony's two kids, and they started to respond. They started to get more stable, like their bipolar symptoms lessened. And so that's kind of where the story begins. And so once they realized that, hey, will this happen with anybody else? They started giving the product or this formula that they developed to other people, and sure enough, it was helping more people. And then they went to, originally they went to the University of Lethbridge in southern Alberta, and they said, here's what we're starting to find. Can you help us figure out a way to document this? So a couple of the researchers there helped them do that. And then they came back with some of the data that they'd collected. And the researcher there says, well, this really isn't my area, but I know a person at the University of Calgary who would be a little bit interested with this, right? And that was Bonnie Kaplan. And so they went to visit her, and she had studied vitamins a little bit on her own, but as single variables, just as single nutrients, and the data really wasn't very robust at all. But she says these guys collected data, which made this intriguing. So she got a grant to do a pilot study, to do an initial study, and that turned into the first publication in 2001 on this formula, the early formula in 11 individuals with bipolar disorder. And that's where the ball began to roll, at least on the academic side.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because it was started mainly for bipolar, and it sounds like that is the condition that it seems to help the most right now. Yeah?
Yeah, mood dysregulation, mood issues are where that product seems to work really well. In the more recent studies that have been done in ADHD, right, the researchers included a mood dysregulation component because that's also a little bit more, it's more life experience. It's more what people will have when they come to the doctor, right? It's not just a pure, clean diagnosis of ADHD. There's other comorbidities that go along with that. And so, but that's where we see, so that mood improvement. And the other thing that we see very consistently is improvements on the global assessment of function, or the clinical global impression scales, right? So that overall function, and that's where the product seems to show. So sometimes we may not see the pure psychiatric diagnosis symptoms improve really well, but it's that global functioning, or the global impressions plus the mood dysregulation, where we see that product work really well.
Yeah, and I think that is honestly almost more important just for me. So, some background,
Yeah.
I tried the formula for honestly just 30 days, and within those 30 days, my emotional regulation was completely changed. I didn't realize how much anxiety I was experiencing. I didn't realize how just much I was taking in from the world. And then at the end of that, I was able to just exist. My brain wasn't racing all the time. I wasn't experiencing those increases in heart rate or just general that like unsettled feeling. I could task switch easier because I wasn't overthinking different things. It was incredible for me. And I think that's where it is, like the quality of life. My ADHD symptoms technically didn't improve, but I was able to focus better. I was able to be more present, able to
Right.
just experience life better. My quality of life significantly improved.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. And I think that speaks to that a lot of those underlying issues seem to drive or worsen some of those other symptoms, right? When those settle down, then it's a little easier.
I think that's exactly it. It was really interesting. This is just a side note. What I noticed for myself was going on it, it actually made me feel a little bit more. So I'm not diagnosed with autism yet, or ADHD actually. I'm in the middle of Wade's psychiatric eval, but a lot more of the autistic qualities that have been noticed actually started being more present after going on the, like, just more of my need for routine and stability.
Hmm.
Like, I just thought that was really interesting. But there is some
Yeah.
research on autism, yeah?
Yes. Yeah. We have one. Well, actually, there's two published studies on the earlier version of the formula in autistic spectrum. In addition to that, in the Maddie study, which was the second double-blind in kids, 30% of those kids actually would have qualified for a diagnosis of autism
Mm-hmm.
because they had symptoms on the spectrum, right? Yeah, so that's another symptom grouping, if you will, where we see some benefit. We see some benefit to that. Yeah. So in the published study on autistic spectrum, what they found is that half of the parents wanted kids to have traditional treatment, and the other half didn't. And so this particular researcher did a naturalistic comparison study, right, to see. And what they found was that symptom improvement generally overall was very similar between traditional treatments, medication treatments, and the nutrients. But the differences is that there were far fewer side effects to get those gains in the nutrient group, and also there was less self-injurious behavior in the nutrient group compared to the medication group.
That's huge. That was actually one
Yeah.
thing, specifically self-injurious behavior. I do get those urges sometimes just to like hit my head or like really squeeze hard on something. And I did notice that those needs decreased significantly. And it's probably connected to that emotional regulation aspect of the brain just being like, oh, I have enough nutrients to create the things that I need.
Yeah. Dr. Charles Popper said, when kind of giving a high level view of what the nutrients do in this combination, they have four basic effects, right? So typically people report improved cognition, or that's clearer thinking, less brain fog, an improved sense of well-being, which kind of goes to that global assessment of function, right? CGI. Improved mood, which is the most robust effect I think that we see generally, and then reduced anxiety and stress. So we see those four general improvements. So people tend to be more resilient. They can handle stress better, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly what I experienced. Now that you just said like able to handle stress better, that's the word I was looking for. Just especially all the stresses that people maybe don't think are stresses, but to our brains are stresses. Because for some reason,
And that begs the question now is, how do vitamins and minerals improve your stress response? That's a big question.
do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, as far as an exact mechanism goes, we don't know exactly why and how it works, but what we think is happening is that the nutrients are up-regulating function. So if we talk about, just as a general principle, enzyme kinetics, right? So how enzymes function and how efficient they are. Aside from temperature and pH, there's only three things that affect how well an enzyme will function. So the first one, and function by function I mean converting substrate to finished product, right? So it's a single step, right? It's a chemical conversion, right? The first one is the number of enzymes. The reaction rate is directly proportional to the number of enzymes. And in our bodies, that's not under our conscious control, right? So the next one is the reaction rate is directly proportional to the amount of substrate or the amount of raw material that's being fed into the process. So if you saturate the enzymes with raw material, you'll reach a peak efficiency. But in our case, that's calories. And so the third thing is cofactor, right? So the reaction rate is directly proportional to the amount of cofactor that's available to the enzymes. Particularly, and we know that at least half of human enzymes require at least one cofactor. And cofactors are generally vitamins and minerals. So if you saturate the enzymes with cofactor, then you can get peak efficiency or maximum efficiency that way. That's harder to do with diet alone because the relative rate of cofactor to calories is low and it remains relatively constant. Supplementing, especially with that, again, with that broad spectrum concept, that full balance of nutrients, is perhaps the easiest way initially to increase that concentration of cofactor and improve the efficiency of those enzyme pathways. That's the primary mechanism that we think is that these nutrients are benefiting, if you will. And then as a hobby, I go into the metabolic pathways and try and identify where those nutrients are in those pathways to kind of illustrate that, to kind of give it a visual, right? And so so we've done that. We've got that couple of those maps in our clinical reference and also in the online training that we do, the educational training we do for health practitioners and whatnot, things like that, at least to illustrate kind of what we're talking about.
I'm trying to think of a good metaphor here. So, like, maybe using the gym as an example for just the fact that, like, you need energy to get muscle. You need to just, like, eat food, right? But like that doesn't mean that you're going to gain muscle. Or, I mean, it could mean that, but it also means that like to move your body. And then you could add on getting weights at your house, just like a few 5-pound weights or something. And that could be more of the other aspect. But then if you want to optimize it, you need to have a lot larger range of different nutrients, which would be all the different types of, say, equipment in a gym to really maximize
Right.
your muscle growth. So that's really similar to how the multi-nutrients work in your body. Even though you can eat, which would be more of the you're getting some weights for home. If you're like that, you're eating an amazing diet, you're going to get some great muscle growth. But if you go to the gym, which would be getting these multi-nutrients, which are very high dose, then you're actually maximizing your ability.
Yeah. Yeah.
I really love the pathway part. I feel like we could dive and nerd into that. I don't think we're going to do that right now, but just as an example so a lot of my listeners have ADHD with dopamine, right? I think we talked about this a little bit. You absolutely have to have vitamin B6 or else you cannot create dopamine.
Yeah. Yeah. And if we look at just as a general thing that I've noticed when I look at some of those pathway maps. So I use the KEGG metabolic database, and you can go through there and you can look at all these different pathways. It's fascinating to look at them. You can isolate right down to a single pathway. So, tyrosine to dopamine. And you can see the little enzyme steps there. And then I use another database to find which cofactors are part of that. And you can see, yeah, there's some cofactors that are connected there that you need. But then when you take a half step back and say tyrosine is actually the center point for a larger network of enzyme reactions and pathways, and almost every single branch needs vitamins and minerals. And then you take a step back, and then you get to the cell, right? And all of the other interconnected pathways, and all of those need vitamins and minerals. It's beautiful to start seeing that layering effect when you start looking at it, right? And so, yeah,
I don't remember if we talked about this before, but just the energy aspect of our cells. For a lot of people, mental health conditions, whether that's bipolar, ADHD, depression, we tend to use ATP differently, or our cells in general, like our mitochondria, they aren't functioning optimally.
that's right. The research strongly suggests that there's a mitochondrial dysfunction in a lot of diagnoses, and not just mental health diagnoses, but a lot of other diagnoses as well, right? Diabetes, heart disease, those types of things. The mitochondria are not functioning optimally. And so when I looked at that, and again, I wasn't expecting to see the nutrient density in that reaction. Compared to the other pathways, if I can make that comparison, you've got tryptophan or tyrosine that kind of is, at least according to the map, it's at the center, right? And everything kind of branches out. But with energy production, you end with a single chemical compound, right? And so it's everything's coming into a center point as opposed to starting at a center and moving out. If that makes sense. So if we start with glycolysis and the breaking down of glucose to pyruvate, there's quite a few nutrients that are involved in that process. And then pyruvate is shunted into the mitochondria where it goes through the Krebs cycle. And there's quite a few nutrients that are involved in the Krebs cycle. And then in the electron transport chain, right, there are quite a few nutrients there that are involved in that process. Way more than I imagined. And the amazing thing for me is that when I got done identifying those and took a step back and looked at it, I was like, my goodness, that's almost the entire label line item of the product. Blew my mind when I originally saw that, and it was like, wow. And this is all to produce ATP, right? And so, so I think to date, that's the most nutrient intense process that I've mapped just to produce one molecule. and then knowing or then realizing that mitochondrial dysfunction plays a big role in a lot of other issues. I think that might be the most significant impact the nutrients are having in the human body, is that stabilizing the mitochondrial function, perhaps.
Yeah, and that just makes complete sense because then you're able to have the energy, which is where the brain fog disappears almost. And you're actually able to move, and then you can make the food that you've been not having the energy to make, and then you can go exercise because you finally have the energy to do that. And
Yeah,
then it's like that wonderful, instead of the sad spiral, it's the happy spiral.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you talked a little bit about bipolar. I was wondering if you had any other stories of people who've just taken this and experienced benefit.
Yeah, one of our for me personally, the most profound experience is one of our coworkers. Now she's retired now, but her name is Jerry. She was diagnosed bipolar in her early teens, and for 20 years went through the system, revolving door, you name it. She tried every known or practically every known prescription medication to find some release, find some stabilization, that type of thing. Um, so go back to the late 90s when Tony and David are kind of sharing this story and asking people to try the product. Her friend heard about it and said, Jerry, I don't know, is this worth trying? Do you want to try this? And she started taking that and noticed a difference. Just kind of like you explained with your experience, right? She could tell something was changing, something was feeling better, she was more stable. She describes an experience, being bipolar and having those manic cycles. She would often go spend the paycheck, right? Spend their money, and uh, after a few weeks of taking the product, maybe it was about a month or so, a couple of months maybe, um, she went out and went grocery shopping and came back home, and her husband came home from work and he said, "Oh, what did you do today?" "Oh, I went grocery shopping." And he was like, "Oh no, you went out shopping, right?" And no, she just bought the groceries, didn't have any other impulses or anything like that to buy or spend. And it's like, wow, this is different, right? Something is beginning to change. Things are beginning to function better. That was one of the ones um, that so she'd never been able to hold down a job. And so when I started working with Tony and David, it was back in 2001, in April of
Oh,
2001.
wow, it's
She'd
a
already
long
been there for
time.
about a year. She started working just about 6 months, 8 months before me, maybe a year before me, working with them to help coordinate and help other people try the product, that kind of thing. And that was when I first met her. I never would have known that she was bipolar when I met her. But then over time, she shared her story and all that kind of stuff. And it was just, so that was for me, that was my first exposure to a significant mental health diagnosis and someone who had benefited from the product.
That's incredible. Because, yeah, I mean, the impulsivity aspect of mania is so hard. I've worked with people who have BPD, bipolar, 1, 2, all of almost
Yeah.
every single serious and persistent mental health illness. And it's hard. It's incredibly difficult. And so just hearing that, that's
Yeah.
wow. You talked about bipolar. Have you heard any stories from other people, say with, I don't know, schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder, or,
hmm
I mean, there's so many other ones too, but
Yeah. One of the other, again, this is within within our circle here. So one of David's sons, Landon, began to develop kind of some unusual symptoms in his mid to late teens, and it turns out that, um, well, he was having episodes of breaks with reality, right? And he was diagnosed with either schizoaffective disorder or schizophrenia at that stage. So, and at that point, David had never really considered, it was like only use the product only if you need it kind of thing, right? And so after they gave the product to Len, and that really stabilized him, really helped him. But then he moved out on his own, and as we tend to do, right? I'm good.
Yeah.
I don't need this. I'm doing all right. And he didn't take the product regularly or consistently, and slowly those symptoms kind of crept back in, and to the point where he didn't even recognize that he needed it anymore, and he had a full-blown paranoid schizophrenic episode. And they brought him back home, and for him, it was really severe. They couldn't manage him at home. They had to take him to the hospital. He was hospitalized for about 3 months, if I remember correctly. They had to medicate him. After about 3 months, they were able to finally bring him home. But that wasn't the end of the story, right? He still had paranoid delusions, things like that just made it really hard. And they tried to get him to take the nutrients, the supplement, but he thought it was toxic. Are you trying to poison me, or is those delusions just kept being a part of his experience? Anyway, over time, they were able to get him to take it regularly, and then finally, it began to stabilize him again. And he's been taking it ever since. And now he runs the order department here at Hardy Nutritionals. And again, you'd never know that he had that experience, right? That he had that diagnosis. But that was where David said, you know what, maybe what we should do, instead of just taking it if we need it, let's start taking this preventatively, for his family and things like that. And so Landon was probably the most significant symptom group that we had, but he had a couple of another daughter that also developed some of these types of behaviors, but there was a different cause for her, right? She had, and we didn't know it, but it turns out that she had an H. pylori infection that really produced some severe psychiatric symptoms for her.
Wow.
And they were able to manage her using some probiotics and some natural antifungal products. They were able to kind of keep that at bay for a long period of time, and then plus the nutrients. So sometimes it's just metabolic. Sometimes there's some other factors that play a role in that. But yeah.
That's just amazing. I also want to get a little bit into the newest research on pregnancy. Switching gears here a little bit. So, I mean, as a person who could have a child at any point, who knows? I thought this research was incredible. So let's hear it.
Yeah. So this is what the researchers call the Nutrimum trial. There's actually 5 publications now that have come out of that clinical trial. So the primary one is, we call it the Nutrimum study. In this study, the researchers recruited 88 women who were pregnant, but who also scored 13 or higher on the Edinburgh prenatal antenatal depression scale. So they're coming into pregnancy with significant depressive symptoms. Then they took that and randomized that into 2 groups. One group taking the micronutrients, and the other group taking what we call an active placebo. So the active placebo had riboflavin and iodine in it. And that's just because the study was done in New Zealand. They recommend those 2 nutrients during pregnancy, so they had to include those in the placebo. So minimum of it was a 10-week trial. I can't remember the little details off the top of my head, but now, along with the recruiting, there were a lot of moms on antidepressants. So this was a medication-free group. There were a lot of moms who came to the trial on antidepressants because they wondered if they could. So Julie Ruckledge followed them separately. So they weren't part of that initial publication, but they were followed and included in an ancillary publication. But what they found so the first step with the moms, they found that depression scores improved. And then they also found a couple of other things, that if they had previously trialed psychiatric medications, they did better. They responded better to the nutrient. So the individuals that are poor responders to medications in the past might do better with the nutrients generally. So that's kind of a thing that they found. The other thing they found is that a lot of the moms had personality difficulties, and those individuals seem to respond better to the nutrients as well. So just just at that mom level, the mother's level, those were some of the things that they found. And then it turns out that there are risk factors to the infant if the mom has depression.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And some of those risk factors include things like preterm births, low birth weight, and then a future risk of psychiatric symptoms. And initially, some of those things can be measured in the child temperament initially. So they did a 28-day evaluation and then a 1-year evaluation in those infants. And they compared that infant group to the babies born to the moms who were taking the antidepressants during pregnancy. And what they found was that the nutrated babies, on the daily essential nutrients, did far better. They clearly outperformed on the Brazelton neonatal scales, right? They outperformed the babies, both the placebo group babies, right, and the babies that were born to moms taking antidepressants, right?
That finding is just so incredible to me. As a person like who has a history of needing antidepressants, who likely will probably have an increased risk of postpartum depression or antenatal depression, like all of that. My hormone, fun to handle. But just that, it just, not only are you feeling better yourself, but then you're not passing a lot of this stress to your kid through those epigenetic factors, through I don't know how it all works with
or at least
development.
maybe the nutrients mitigate those factors, right? Yeah.
Like, it's just really simple. I think that's why I love it.
Yeah, as complex as the body is, this is such a simple principle, and it's nutritional based. Bonnie Kaplan, one of the things that she said that's kind of stuck with me is that nutrition is not the only factor that plays a role in mental health, but it's probably the most overlooked factor. Right?
Definitely.
It's so simple that we overlook it. It's easy to overlook, right?
It is. And especially since we honestly haven't had a lot of research on this, because both nutrition and psychology are super new, like within the last 100 to 200 years. So,
Yeah.
of course, like there's just that aspect to it already. But then there's a lot of that mistrust, I think, in how nutrition can impact mental health.
Well, yeah, like I say, we've studied nutrients for 80 plus years, usually just single variables. And so the impression is, well, nutrition really doesn't work. You need it to live, yeah, but it doesn't really do anything else. And actually, Dr. Popper, Charles Popper, again, along with Bonnie Kaplan and Julia Ruckledge, wrote a chapter in an American Psychiatric Association textbook called Complementary and Integrative Treatments in Psychiatric Practice. And that was published in 2017.
You know what?
APA.
I think I've actually read that.
Yeah. And they go through the single variable, single nutrient evidence for mental health. And the only thing that stands out significantly in single variable is folate as an adjunct to medication treatment. So if you're taking psychiatric medications, you can take a little folate and you'll get a better response to your psych meds, right? But when it comes to the broad spectrum, and at the time that they published that, there was just one, the first double blind in kids was just being published when that came out. So there wasn't any double blind studies to evaluate then. But there were other double blinds done in behavior in kids and adolescents and young adults, either in schools or in incarcerated populations, where they gave just the RDA level to these kids and saw statistically significant improvements in some of those antisocial behaviors. So they cited that evidence as evidence for that, the proof of concept, if you will, for that broad spectrum approach. The difference between those studies is that each of those studies use a completely different product. But that's concept, right? That's that broad spectrum concept that works, right? And then ours is a higher dose. They gave the RDA levels for most of those studies. We're giving a higher dose. So for mental health, that higher dose may be more relevant, perhaps, compared to, and I don't know for sure if those other studies were actually looking at mental health diagnoses rather than just antisocial behavior. But there's some differences there that we can spend a lifetime studying yet, and so there's room there for
Oh, we
that.
really could. I think that is actually part of why this works with ADHD. The differences in metabolism of almost every single nutrient that we consume. Therefore, it
Right,
makes sense that we actually need more than the general population.
right.
And that's where it
And
works.
that's what works. And interesting, if we look at the definition of the RDA, so this is, if we go back to the dietary reference intakes, the RDA is your daily target for intake. And then if we look at the definitions that go along with that, it's the amount. It's expected to be adequate for 97 to 98% of apparently healthy individuals. So that leaves 2 to 3% of the population that are apparently healthy that even the RDA is not adequate for. So that already suggests there's a higher need already for 2 to 3% of the population. Then it says it's not expected to replete individuals previously undernourished. So if you've had a poor intake for a period of time, just consuming the RDA level is not enough. You need a higher level to top up the body. And then the third part of that definition is that it's not adequate for individuals that have disease states marked by higher requirements. So we kind of, the deep read is important to understand that the RDA level might work for a high percentage of people, but how many of us have higher needs or have had poor diet and we need higher amounts, or our bodies have higher requirements? And Dr. Bruce Ames published a series of paper on what he called binding affinity, the KM factor, that some of those, a single point mutation, single polymorphism, changes the affinity of that enzyme for its cofactor. And if you have a higher concentration of cofactor, it overcomes that little deficit and the enzyme works properly. How many of us have those?
Yeah,
Right.
which is exactly, I'm sure a lot of people listening are going to be like, what about the MTHFR mutation? It's not a mutation, it's polymorphism. That's, I guess, just semantics. But
Yeah.
that is exactly why we see people with those differences needing more folate or folic acid.
Yeah. Exactly.
Like, you cannot process folic acid, and it's incorrect. That's just a lot of online messaging for people to just get their or sell their stuff. Some people would benefit from a methylated folate. It depends specifically on your specific polymorphisms. Very
Right.
complicated stuff.
Right.
And for some people, methylated folate actually can make their symptoms worse if they have
Yes.
the
Yeah.
polymorphism. But that's where it is. Like, you just need more. It's
Yeah.
fascinating.
If you look at the product Deplin, which is methylfolate, it's 15 milligrams. That's like, what is it? It's 100 or more times the RDA. Maybe it's even higher than that, right? But that works for a lot of people. And again, it's concentration. So it goes back to those three factors that affect enzyme function or enzyme kinetics.
That's it exactly. And I also want to talk a little bit about how you make the different nutrients more available for people. Like, that is
Sure.
why I think your product seems to work better. But it's also why it has a lot of capsules a day.
Yes. Yeah. Well, yeah. The calcium, I'll call them the macro elements: calcium, magnesium, phosphorus. They're bulky. If we looked at our clinical dose, the dose that's been studied in clinical trials, is 12 capsules a day, or at least, we find there's a bit of a range there, but 12 a day is what's been studied. If we look at that relative to the ingredients, it takes about 8 of those capsules just to hold the calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus. And then you could fit all the other minerals, trace minerals, and vitamins into about 4 capsules a day. So it's bulky to begin with. Very few products actually deliver the full. We deliver just over the full RDA of calcium in that product, along with everything else. And few other products do that. But one of the things that we do is we chelate the minerals. So if we think of chelation, most people are familiar with chelation therapy, but chelation is actually a chemical term, meaning that the ligand has 2 binding points for the mineral. So think of it like a horseshoe magnet, right? You have 2 ends of the horseshoe magnet, and then it binds to something. So that's the mineral, and that product binds in 2 places to hold it or to carry it. And so the chelation process binds with those minerals in a way that helps it so it doesn't dissociate too quickly. It gets absorbed a little bit better, or at least helps to make that a little more water soluble. And then if it's more water soluble, we think it's a little more bioavailable, right? And again, it's there are other products out there that seem to work or seem to absorb, right? But we figured it's those factors in combination with the daily essentials with our product that we contribute to the outcomes that we see. And that's very complete, a high dose, and the chelation together. Each of them is one leg of a 3-legged stool, if I can put it that way, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's exactly why. It's just all the things working together to really allow your body to use it in the way that a person who has more mental health things going on in their life need. Also, like, it makes it so that the body doesn't work as hard. And our bodies are already working really hard.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Life is challenging enough, right?
it is. So 12 capsules, that is a lot for a lot of people. For me, I promised myself I was going to do it. I made it work. And once I started seeing the results, it was a no-brainer, and it started becoming part of my routine.
I think that's a significant thing, right? A lot of people, once they recognize they're getting a benefit, then it's like, okay, yeah, I want to make this part of my routine. And I went through that experience myself, right? When I first started taking the product years ago, I didn't take 12 a day. And interestingly, the formula has changed over time, or, we've made some alterations. The original formula was 32 capsules a day. It was incredibly bulky back then. So it was 8 capsules 4 times a day to get that level that was in that very first publication, or the first 10 publications were using that very bulky formula.
That's so impressive that they stuck to that.
Oh, yeah. But like you say, once they realize, oh, hey, this works for me, then it's like, I'm not going to let go of that. I don't want to go back to where I was. This helps, right? So over time, we've been able to reduce that dose down to 12 from 32. So that's some progress. There's still some capsule fatigue, yeah. But I remember the morning that I was pouring out capsules in my hand. I'm like, look at all those pills. That's just ridiculous. And it's like, no, I understand what this is doing for me. And I made the decision right there. This will be part of my food. I haven't eaten until I have taken this with my food. And that became part of my routine.
That is exactly what I did. So I almost have to force myself to eat 3 meals a day. It's more just my altered hunger cues. It's really hard. But it was pairing it together. If whoever's listening with ADHD, y'all know that pairing tasks together, best thing to do. Best thing for us.
Yep.
And so, it works. I also really love that you have a program it's free, right? Where you can talk to these practitioners to help you through this process.
Yes. Yeah, we have a group of wellness advisors, or a team of wellness advisors here. The way we've kind of designed our company to work is that we first and foremost want to speak with health practitioners. And we teach them everything that we've learned in a nutshell, obviously. We try and teach them everything we've learned. We try and help them understand, show them where the studies are, have access to the studies, and give them the benefit of the experience that we've had over the last 20 years. And then as part of that process, individuals who come that aren't health practitioners, we give them kind of a softer version, a pared down version, if you will, of the training we give to the doctors, or the education we give to the health professionals. We do the same thing for them too. And then, sometimes they'll have those moments where this is too many capsules, right? And, we can have that conversation with them. Where are you at? Where were you at? Where are you now? Have you noticed any changes? Do you want to continue that way, or do you want to go back? We can help ask them questions that maybe they're not quite ready to ask themselves. Perhaps, I don't know. Things like that, and we can do.
So, like, helping them through what are some of these
Supportive.
things that are happening in my body. So I talked to Dr.
Exactly.
Z.
Yeah.
She's fabulous. Love her so much. And
Yeah.
I was telling her about how, as I've been taking it, I started to feel a little bit more tingling. And then she's like, okay, well, that's a sign that you don't need you can reduce some of your medication that you're taking. And so I restarted my sertraline probably back in January, or maybe it was February. And then 2 months ago, started with the Hardy product. And then, yeah, that's when I noticed some of that. And then I was able to get off my sertraline again. And so,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. We help people do what we call side effect audits. Right. So it's interesting. This is an interesting phenomenon. And one of the things that Dr. Popper said is that this product works on a broad range of psychiatric symptoms. It seems to have a beneficial effect, and it has a diverse effect on brain function, and it also upregulates or potentiates response to psychiatric drugs. And so that's one of the phenomenons we've noticed with this product. So all drugs have side effects. And it's hypothesized that people under-respond to psychiatric medications because their system isn't optimized. And once the system starts to be optimized, then we start seeing over-response, if you will, to psychiatric medications, right? And so we can help people understand where to look, how to find out whether or not what they're experiencing is a psychiatric medication side effect or not, right? And guide them through that. And then this is where the doctor comes in, is we teach the doctor how to do that as well, right? To understand what's going on. And then the doctor then can help the patient with that process, right? But we can at least help people identify what's going on, and then they can make a decision. So, yeah, I want to start working on reducing this or whatever. But that's part of what we offer. And it's all of that is built into the price of the product itself.
I just love this, all of it. I mentioned it to a lot of people, but this is, I think, one of the most ethical supplement companies I've ever talked to. And it's exactly that, because you all care so much about the person and not about, obviously, like, money's important, but you first care about the person, making sure that they're getting the care they need.
Yeah, as much as we possibly can. That was one of David Hardy's, we're going to stand on this hill. And part of our mission statement is that we want to contribute to a world where mental health issues are not a big factor in quality of life.
Which is exactly what you're doing.
Done if we focus on the person, right?
And I really encourage anyone who's listening just to go into the description, just take a look at it, see if it's ready for you. I honestly think almost every single person with any sort of mental health condition should at least give it a 2-month trial. It is incredible the way that it affects at least my stress, my ability to manage my life, my emotional regulation. It has completely changed just myself. And I think everybody needs to have that chance to.
Yeah, that's well said.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk through a lot of this. I appreciate that. And if anyone needs to connect with you or another person from Hardy, y'all have lots of options on the site.
That's right. Yeah, we've got phone numbers all over the site, emails. There's a lot of different ways to connect with us.
It's another thing I like. Very easy to communicate. All right. Well, thank you so much again.
Well, you're very welcome. Thanks for inviting me to come and join with you today and have a little chat about this. Appreciate that.